Hello and welcome to Talk Local. I'm your host, Greg Mercer, and I'm glad you could join us. We're going to start tonight's show with a look at a story out of St. Agatha in Wilmot Township. That is the small rural community where the Waterloo Catholic District School Board is considering closing the village's one school, and it understandably has some parents upset. But first, in the show's second half, we're going to hear all about Jane Walk events happening around the region next weekend. But first, we are happy to have Kathy Malik with us. Kathy is the co-chair of the St. Agatha School Council. She has 4 children who go to the school, and you were one of the parent representatives on the committee that looked at this issue of whether St. Agatha should close. So thanks for joining us, Kathy.
You're welcome. Thank you.
First, we should ask, how did St. Agatha get in this situation? Why are they looking at closing the school?
Well, some would say it's a self-fulfilling prophecy from the board, but essentially we've been reviewed twice in the last 6 years, and that has drastically affected our ability to recruit new students to come, because the community word of mouth is that the school is always getting reviewed for closure, and so it's been difficult for us to attract new students. That, combined with the board trying to change our boundary to remove some of our pipeline of students, triggered us into a discussion last March that ended up in an appeal, which then ended up in our review this year.
So it's been a bit of a battle to stop this, but where is it at now?
Right now, the ARC review has finished for this year, and they've made their final recommendations to the board. We were successful this past week to ensure that 2 options were submitted to the trustees for their consideration instead of just one closure option.
And what's the second option mean?
It would be to remain open and to include some new boundary options for us.
Okay. Well, so walk me through this. What does this school mean to St. Agatha?
Well, it's actually the oldest school in the region. The Sisters of Notre Dame, the nuns with the Catholic faith, with all the immigrants that came in originally, like way back hundreds of years ago, started an orphanage there, and it has progressed into the school. And it was kind of always intended that that school, that land, all of the church and all the surrounding thing was meant to stay together. And it's the Waterloo Board's last remaining, oldest school, I should say.
So there's a ton of history, but what about just as a hub for the village of St. Agatha and being able to send your kids there? What does it mean?
Well, it's more for Wilmot Township. Okay. So Wilmot Township is one of the fastest growing areas in our region, and a lot of the parents from New Hamburg and Baden are commuting into Kitchener and Waterloo. So it's actually a terrific school to be able to pick up your kids, drop off your kids, and this September we're offering all day, every day kindergarten and before and after school care. So it all just kind of fits really well, and so having this decision now is very premature given that that's coming.
To lose this school, what would that mean? What kind of an impact would that have?
For Wilmot Township, it's actually going to be an immense impact, because we're looking at Baden, which the public school board is looking at. They've already had to build a second school because the first one got overcrowded before they even started. Now they're in another review to consider new options, whether or not they need to build a third school. And here we are in the Catholic board reducing it to one single school in New Hamburg in the face of all this growth that's happening.
The school board, we're going to talk to Wayne Buchholz in the next segment, but he says basically we can't afford to continue to run a school that's inefficient, was the word he used. He says there's simply not enough kids at the school to make it sustainable. How do we fix that problem?
Well, the first thing is offering daycare options, which we were slotted last for the daycare as they phased it in, to stop reviewing us so that we can send the message that we're stable, and also to invest in us. We haven't had an investment in 10 years. They haven't been putting any money into the school at all, and that's what I mean by self-fulfilling prophecy. They've kind of set us up for failure, but the money doesn't come from the board. It comes from the Ministry of Education. All the board has to do is put together the application, put together a compelling story, which the ARC has given them tons of information to do, and they apply to the ministry for it. So it doesn't actually come from any other schools. Nobody else is at a disadvantage if they invest in St. Agatha.
So this idea that the school board has suggested that this siphons resources away from other schools, you're saying that's not the case?
Yeah.
So what's the plan to try to stop this? How do you save this school?
Well, we just have to appeal to the trustees, which is much less of an incline than appealing to the other ARC members who stand to gain if we close. The trustees are meant to represent our interests and for the board to meet the needs of the community. The community has asked us throughout this process, the community has asked us for daycare options and for an investment in the school. The trustees have the ability to grant that and to recommend it. And so now our job is to give them all the data and compel them to vote in our favor.
How hopeful are you that they can be persuaded?
The trustees have been very encouraging. They have taken a really strong interest in the whole scenario and asking a lot of really great questions and looking for information. So I am very hopeful that they are trying their best to make a good decision.
I want to ask you about this issue of walkability. The school board says that's a concern, that St. Agatha does not have a very walkable student body. Most kids are bused or driven there. What do you say to that?
I would respond that most rural schools are primarily bused kids. If you look at any of the small schools, you're going to see lower enrollment because you can't have a 2-hour bus ride for 4-year-olds, and St. Agatha is no exception to that.
Why are they fixated on that? Why are they worried about walkability?
Well, they put it into the terms of reference for the ARC to consider, and the pessimist side of me says they did that as a systemic discrimination against us because we can't compete on that, obviously. If even though people in St. Agatha, walking to St. Agatha, have to be bused because Notre Dame is such a busy road that they've established that it's a hazard. And so, again, we have these forces working against us that are just not fair.
So how many students are going to the school now?
About 105.
Okay. Is that enough, do you think, to continue this school, even if you can bring in some daycare?
Well, not at the current state, no. Our capacity is 170.
Okay.
But the nice thing is that the Catholic families exist. We've done a lot of research over the last 8 months, and we've shown that there's over 200 Catholic kids in Baden alone that are currently attending a public school, and that's why they're overcrowded. But if the Waterloo Board can meet the needs of those Catholic parents by offering stability, offering daycare, then we will see them come.
What else do you want the school board to know about this issue and how much this means to people whose kids go to the school?
Well, the kids that go to the school, I mean, I could talk for days about, anecdotal evidence of why it's a special school. But ultimately, if you take a broader picture, if I'm sitting in the seat of the trustees, Wilmot is a growing community, the fastest in the region. And you can't limit your offering to one school when you have such growth on the horizon. And it would just be irresponsible to do that.
Okay. Well, Kathy, we're going to have to leave it at that, but thank you for coming in to tell us about this issue. And we'll be right back after the break. You're watching Talk Local. Talk Local. I'm your host, Greg Mercer, and we are continuing to talk about the potential that St. Agatha could lose its Catholic school. We are pleased to be joined by Wayne Buchholz, who is the chair of the Waterloo Catholic District School Board, and Wayne is here to help us understand this issue better, and thank you for coming in, Wayne.
Thank you, Greg, for the invitation.
So could you explain to us how we got to this point? What happened? There was a review?
There was a review of St. Agatha 5 years ago, and the decision of the board at that point in time was to keep St. Agatha open. We were hopeful that the community would be able to grow to some extent, and in the 5 years since, it really hasn't grown. It's still a very, very small school. As part of that review, we had recommended that the western part of Waterloo, the Vista Hills area, that the Catholic schools would be bused. Catholic students would be bused to St. Agatha, as opposed to going to a Waterloo school. Administration came back to us about a year ago and asked that the board reverse that and allow those students to go to St. Nicholas in Waterloo. The parents obviously expressed a concern because that would have implied that there would have been no growth at all at St. Agatha.
Right.
The board decided not to accept administration's recommendation. They voted to keep those students continuing at St. Agatha, which automatically triggered another accommodation review process. And the review that has gone on over the last year is a result of that.
So where are we at now? There has been a recommendation, as I understand, to
Correct.
close St. Agatha?
The committee came back with a preferred recommendation to close St. Agatha School. The committee was divided, and they came back as well with a second alternative recommendation, which is to keep St. Agatha open.
Okay.
So basically, those two recommendations will be coming to the board in the near future.
Can you tell us, Wayne, about the situation in St. Agatha, why it is being considered for closure? What's the problem with that school?
The biggest issue with the school is it's so small.
Okay.
There's not enough students, there's not enough perceived growth in the near future to warrant keeping it open. One of the difficulties we've encountered as a board is that the Ministry of Education at one point in time provided an extra grant to fund small schools like St. Agatha, especially the rural schools. That grant is gone. The ministry has withdrawn that. And as a result, it's becoming prohibitively expensive to continue to operate schools with populations around 100 students. St. Agatha is the one we're considering now. We will be considering other schools in the near future.
How much of an issue is this for the Catholic School Board, this bigger problem of declining enrollment? And how do you get around that?
You can't. The ministry funds school boards based on a per pupil allotment per student. So if you have fewer students, you get less money. At the present time, the ministry funds us at about $11,000 a student per year. So if you drop 100 students, you're dropping $1 million in terms of total revenue. And if you have less revenue, you can't accommodate all the needs that exist in the system at a particular moment. The biggest difficulty for us as well is that the ministry sets requirements in terms of how we actually spend the money that we're given. We have very little flexibility around funding. They tell us what the class sizes will be.
Right.
They tell us basically how many teachers we have to have, and we can't change that. That's in a very, very tightly controlled envelope, and we have to spend it in those areas.
I want to ask you about something that the parents of kids who go to St. Agatha have been raising this issue. They say our school's kind of been doomed to fail. They feel, some of them do, it's been neglected to the point where the cost of those repairs are so prohibitive, the only solution is to close the school. What do you say to that?
Well, I can recall not too many years ago when the board put in what you call a porta pack and a gym, which costs a fair bit of money in order to build out there. And that was designed to support the school itself. The difficulty is it hasn't attracted additional students. We continue to get smaller and smaller, and the projection for the next couple of years is that St. Agatha will eventually drop below 100 students.
And that's not sustainable.
And that's not sustainable from our point of view.
What about the issue of walkability? I think that was an issue that this review looked at.
Correct. There are very few students who walk to St. Agatha.
Okay.
The vast majority, over 90% of the students, are bused.
And why is that an issue or a problem?
Well, we'd like to have schools where students can actually walk to school.
Okay.
Number one, it reduces our costs when it comes to transportation. And number two, we think that it makes more sense. One of the big issues around a lot of schools, and I'm sure you've seen it if you go past a school early in the morning or late in the afternoon, the number of parents who are dropping off students, you add that to buses, and you've got mass confusion on a daily basis around schools. And it's not just St. Agatha, it's almost every school in the system, both public and Catholic. We'd like to develop a walkable solution where we have students actually walking or taking bikes to school.
What are you hearing from parents in the St. Agatha area about this issue?
They're concerned. They're concerned. It's quite obvious that they'd like to maintain the school. When I was a principal for the board, I had a small school. I was principal at St. Bridget's School in Ayr.
Okay.
Small school, not overly large, in a small community. You can do some incredible things with a community. You can do and become the hub of the community, which is what our goal is for schools. The difficulty is that with less funding, I don't know how viable it is to maintain those schools. St. Bridget, when I had it, was around 250 students,
Okay.
maximum. That was the largest we got when I was there. But 250 is a far range from 100 students.
Well, just a last thing on this then, Wayne. Do schools have a role to be that community hub in a small rural town? Is that the school's place?
Well, not only in a small rural town, but also wherever you are in the region.
Okay.
I believe the school should become the hub. The ministry has a philosophy that they'd like to move schools into that kind of a role where they are the hub of the community. And I think eventually it will occur. The difficulty we're running into right now is that we can't afford it.
Okay. Well, we'll have to leave it at that. We really appreciate you coming in to explain this to us.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Okay. We'll be right back after this. Welcome back to Talk Local. I'm your host, Greg Mercer. Before we switch gears later in the show to talk about Jane's Walk, we're going to spend one final segment looking at the debate around the school in St. Agatha that is facing a possible closure. And I'm pleased to be joined in studio by my colleague, Louisa D'Amato. Louisa is a columnist for the Waterloo Region Record, and she's a former education reporter. So she's been following this issue very closely. So Louisa, thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having me, Greg.
So why don't I start by telling people a little about this column you wrote on this very issue a few weeks ago. You started that column by saying, "A gun has been pointed at the head of tiny St. Agatha Catholic School. Soon the trigger will be pulled and it will be dead." What made you say that?
It's been very clear to me since I've been observing this issue that the school board has got their array of schools that they're looking at in West Waterloo and in Wilmot Township. As enrollment declines, they have to think about rationalizing those schools and getting rid of one of them. And very early on, back in the fall, they said that we have 5 schools under review, and then they named the 4 schools other than St. Agatha and said, these will not be closed.
Right.
So I'm like, okay, you've decided already. And often that happens. I mean, years and years ago, Victoria School in downtown Kitchener, residents there said that the school board had let it rot, basically, until it was impossible to repair, and then they closed it. And some of that same stuff seems to be happening in St. Agatha.
So the parents who are telling us, we feel like this has already been decided, they're not that out of line. There is something to suggest that the school board's kind of made its mind up.
That's what I felt when I saw that initial, before the process even began, they had already decided that the 4 of the 5 schools were not going to close.
So what is it, as you see it, that they're concerned about with St. Agatha from the school board? Why do they want the school to close?
Well, St. Agatha's vulnerable because there's only 100 students in there, and the ministry funds school boards to have about 400 students in the school.
Okay.
So that means that you're heating and lighting and providing a principal and an administrator for a building that doesn't have enough students to make that pay. Mm-hmm. And that's true in many vulnerable communities, and not just St. Agatha. Right. Generally, large booming suburbs get nice big schools, and they're fine. But the small inner city areas that are not, with a lot of lower income families, small rural towns, both of those tend to get smaller schools, and they tend to be more vulnerable, both the school and the community. A school is not just a school too. Right. It's a community hub. It's a place where people can meet after hours for choir practice or scouts or basketball games, and they've been designed that way by our government so that when a community loses a school, they don't just have their kids bust out, they lose their community hub as well. It's a big deal. Well,
this is a huge hole that it leaves in these towns when the school is closed.
Yes. And when I said that the competition was rigged, and I really do feel it is, part of that was looking at the goals of the committee that's looking at this. So they have certain things that they value and that they're going to measure all the schools up against. And one of them is how many students can walk. And walking to school is great for fitness and everything. Well, 6 of the 100 kids at St. Agatha walk to school. Right. And many of them live right by the school, but they don't walk. They have to be bused because there are no sidewalks where they live. That isn't really fair. That's not really a fair way to judge a school, because you could build a sidewalk and everybody would be fine. And other factors that I think are really important, if I were a school trustee, I would think are important, such as you have a church right next to the school, so there's that opportunity to have interplay, and there's an opportunity to be a truly Catholic school. Right. Or the importance of the school in the community, which I think ought to be considered. Those things are not on the list. So it's the reason I think it's rigged is the types of factors they're considering and the types of factors that they're not considering.
They're stacking the deck against the school.
That's what I think. Yeah.
The school board says their basic answer to why they have to do this is that, well, we can't maintain schools that are inefficient. They say St. Agatha is chronically under-enrolled. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't make sense to continue a school like that. So how do they fix that problem without closing the school?
Well, they're acting as if it's a yes or no situation. And in fact, when school boards really value certain schools that are smaller, they have ways of doing it. First of all, Wilmot Township as a whole is growing. Mm-hmm. So that's not an issue. We are in a growing region. It's not the same issue it is here as it would be in other parts of Ontario. And the other thing that I think is important to remember is that the public school board thought that it absolutely had to close a school in Cambridge. It's got 5 or 6. I forget how many schools, way more schools than it needs. But because of the way Cambridge is laid out, each school gets its own little, its own. They have 5 high schools there,
Right.
and they were going to go to 4. And they finally decided that in Cambridge they want to have smaller high schools. Maybe they won't get as many course offerings. Maybe you won't be able to get a lacrosse team or whatever. But that's what they want, and that's what they kept. And the sun still rises in the east every morning. So I think that they're just trying to. They would be able to do it if they wanted to do it.
Where there's a will, there's a way. There are
Yeah,
alternatives, you're saying.
I think so.
What about this larger issue of the Catholic Board and some of the issues they're having with enrollment? How do they fix that? Because that's kind of what's at heart here. Do you have any thoughts on what the board does with this issue?
It's not just a Catholic issue.
Okay.
Enrollment is falling for almost every school board everywhere. We are in a growing area in Waterloo region, so often our enrollment is more flat, but it has been falling recently because people are having fewer children.
Okay.
That's just a reality. Everybody has to deal with that.
You covered school boards for many years as a reporter at The Record. You've seen schools, you've been through this before, you've followed this process. Can parents stop this if they're vocal enough, if they do the right things? Can they sway trustees? You've seen that happen?
Yes, I have seen that happen. I saw it happen in Cambridge when those parents would not rest until they kept their 5 high schools in Cambridge. It did not make any sense for them to have 5 high schools by the numbers, but that's what they really, really wanted, and the trustees listened to them. I mean, they're elected trustees, and this is one of the few decisions locally based that they actually get to make, that the province doesn't make for them.
So there's some hope here. This isn't over yet.
No, it's not over yet, and I wish the parents of St. Agatha well.
Do you have any other thoughts on this school and what the loss would mean when a community like St. Agatha loses a school like this?
Yeah. Actually, I think that the Catholic School Board has to think about how Catholic does it want to be.
Okay.
I have an Italian name. Everybody thinks I'm Catholic. I am not Catholic.
Okay.
But I think that if you're going to have 2 school boards and one of them is going to be Catholic, then it really should be Catholic. And one of the things that one of the parents talked to me about when I was at one of the open houses was that she said, the reason I'm so upset at the thought of my school closing, St. Agatha, is that when somebody dies in the community, that beautiful big church in St. Agatha, there's a funeral, and the whole school choir goes over during the school day and sings for that person's funeral.
No kidding.
To have a church next to a school isn't just an academic exercise. It's an experience of community that isn't available to a church that doesn't have to a school that doesn't have a church beside it. And so I think the fact that St. Agatha has that church and school symbiosis should mean something. And I think that this Catholic board should say, maybe this is part of what it means to be a Catholic school board.
Okay. Well, we'll have to leave it at that. But Louisa, thank you so much for giving us your perspective on this. Okay. We'll be right back after the break. back to Talk Local. I'm your host, Greg Mercer. We're going to switch gears now and talk about Jane's Walk. Perhaps you've heard of it. And we are pleased to be joined by Juanita Metzger, who is the organizer of the event in our region. And Juanita is going to tell us more about Jane's Walk and what it is. So first, what is this Jane's Walk we keep hearing about?
Jane's Walk is one of my favorite events in Waterloo Region, and actually it happens internationally. It's an event that honors Jane Jacobs, the urban activist and advocate who believed that neighborhoods and people really have a strong role to play in defining their urban environment. And she died in 2006, and shortly after that, a group of people in Toronto went out for a series of walks in honor of her life, the year that she died, because Jane really believed that in order to get to know a place, you have to get out and walk in it. And you can't just zip by in a neighborhood in a car.
What a radical idea.
I know, and think that you can know a place, but you really have to walk through the streets and get to know the people who are there.
So what starting next Friday, is that correct?
Correct, Friday, May 2nd.
Yeah, so there will be a series of walks locally. What can people expect? What's it going to look like?
People can expect almost 30 walks led by citizens of Waterloo Region.
Okay.
And they'll be held in Cambridge, Kitchener, Waterloo. And this year there's going to be a walk held in Elmira and one held in Baden. And these walks, as I mentioned, are all led by citizens and residents of the cities that they're offered in. And they are walks that tell a story. They're meant to be walking conversations. Some of them are held in neighborhoods. There's some being hosted in the Central Frederick neighborhood, Westmount, the Mount Hope Bride-Up area, sections of downtown, and some of them are more issue focused. So they might be related to transportation or parking infrastructure, or the Rainbow Coalition is holding a walk in downtown Kitchener of the sites and places that are significant to the history of the Rainbow community.
So we're going to hear about two specific walks later in the show, but can you give us a flavor of some of the highlights? What are some of the ones that are maybe popular that people come out for year after year or something like that?
Well, there's one neighborhood, the Mount Hope Bride-Up Park neighborhood, that has hosted a walk for 6 years. Jane's Walk has been happening for 8 years in total, so they've been hosting for quite some time, and they pick a different area of their neighborhood each year to focus on. Another walk that's quite popular is offered in the Mount Hope Cemetery, and there's some really fascinating stories of people who helped shape our cities, some famous, some forgotten, some that we've never heard of. And walks that are also really popular are given by people who have an interesting story to tell. So there's a woman who is legally blind, and she and her guide dog Christopher are going to give a walk of McLennan Park. She has lived in that neighborhood for 39 years and was fully sighted when she first lived there, and her use of the park has changed over time as the park has moved away from being what was used to be called Mount Trashmore, but it's now McLennan Park. Now that it's a fully functioned park, and her use of that park has changed as well, she's going to share her story of safety and accessibility and the way that she interacts differently in that park as a result of her changing story.
What a great story. That is so cool. I mean, anyone can sign up for this? Do you have to pay? Do you have to register, anything like that?
The walks are entirely free, and all of the walks are listed on the Jane's Walk website, which is www.janeswalk.org. And on the homepage, people can search by the city. So if they're interested in Kitchener walks or Waterloo walks or the Elmira walk or the Baden walk, there's a search bar on the front page, and that will take them to a full list of all of the walks that are available. And no need to register, people just show up. And so sometimes it's a group of 7 people, and sometimes it's a group of 47 people. But there's always a chance to interact. And the beauty, as I mentioned, is that it's a walking conversation where it's not only the the host that is telling and sharing stories, but people who are participating in the walk are also invited to contribute.
Okay. How did you get involved in this?
I got involved because I led a walk for 3 years, and one of the years there were only 4 walks offered. And in my role as community engagement with the Crime Prevention Council, we saw a real opportunity to further engage citizens and neighborhoods in telling the story and shaping the future story of their communities. Because for the Crime Prevention Council, we've always maintained that neighborhoods play a very strong role in determining the future of the neighborhood, the kind of neighborhood that they want to live in. And that aligns very much with Jane Jacobs' philosophy as well. So we saw an opportunity to further engage people in being connected to the spaces and the people that make up the stories of our neighborhood.
Are there basic things you want people to get out of these walks, to maybe be surprised by what they see in their own backyards?
Every person that I talk to who's been on a Jane's Walk says that they've learned something new, either about their own neighborhood or about an area of the city that they've never been to before. And that I think is really exciting, to be a bit of a tourist in your own city and to explore your backyard with a new outlook.
Do you have a favorite walk that you would recommend if someone's going to do one? And it's probably hard to pick from the 30 or so you said.
It is hard to pick from 30. But
or is there a new one you're excited about?
I would have to say I'm excited about the walk that Sharon and her guide dog Christopher are going to give.
Very cool.
They're a great pair, and they've enlisted the help of a volunteer who's going to be a third pair of eyes to help them lead their walk through McLennan Park. So I think she has a really great story and a really great perspective to see a different area of the city.
Hey, fantastic. We'll have to leave it at that. But thank you for telling us about this, and we'll be right back after the break. Welcome back to Talk Local. I'm your host, Greg Mercer, and we are continuing to talk about Jane's Walk. In the last segment, we heard what those walks are all about, and now we're going to focus in on a specific walk. We have a gentleman, Martin DeGroot, here with us in studio, who's going to tell us more about it. Martin, you are hosting, you've organized something called the Sunday Morning Church Walk. And just so people know a little bit more about you, you're former executive director of the Waterloo Region Arts Council.
Right.
You're a local historian, and you also are the writer of a popular arts column for the Waterloo Region Record. So welcome, and thank you for coming.
Glad to be here.
So the Sunday morning church walk, what is this all about? What can people expect?
I'm hoping people. I think I'm gonna be surprised, and
Okay.
I hope people will be surprised because it's actually a walk where I'm expecting people to be able to discover things.
Okay.
Because I think churches in the downtown area, which I've always really had a great deal of affection for and respect for, are kind of hidden gems. They're very visible. You see them as you go by, but unless you're a member of one of the congregations, I think most of the congregations downtown have members that drive in because they're descendants of the people who originally formed them like 150, 60, 70, 80 years ago. Then you walk by and you don't know what goes on inside. So I'm kind of so they're hidden gems, as I said, and I'm kind of hoping that we can kind of discover some of the things that they could mean and what their place is, particularly in the public and civic sphere. Because they're not public and civic spaces, right? They're the ecclesiastical spaces. They're kind of semi-private, semi-public, but they belong to the congregations who are separate communities. But they also have a very public presence, and also most of the downtown churches have been very generous in their use of their space. So they serve all sorts of purposes besides the purpose of the congregations.
If people can go into the churches and see them, or
No,
is this
well,
going to be an exterior? What do they?
This is actually a follow-up to something I did almost 20 years ago, where I helped organize a tour, which was a doors open type tour of downtown churches. And in that case, the congregations were the hosts. They put on the presentations, welcomed people, showed them around the buildings, that kind of thing. In this case, we can't do that because I chose to do it on a Sunday morning when they're actually meeting in those churches. But I thought it might be interesting to go by when the bells ring and when people gather in the churches. Maybe we'll hear hymn singing. I don't know, organ playing. I don't know how loud it is. I've done the walk to see how long it takes and take some pictures so that I could put a graphic on the account on the website. But I've never actually done that walk on a Sunday morning, so I'm going to discover things, I hope.
This sounds like fun.
Yeah.
What kind of work did you have to put into to plan this and research this and to know
Well,
what
a lot
you're
of it is a
looking at?
follow-up because we already did that from 20 years
Okay.
ago. And the other thing is to sort of compound, because there'll be an emphasis on their cultural uses.
Okay.
I'll write my column for this Saturday, and I've already got a long list of, over the next 2-3 weeks, cultural events, mostly musical events that take place in churches around Waterloo Region. It's amazing how important they are. And I think that's kind of, again, taken for granted. But the other thing is, 20 years ago when we did this, the churches seemed vulnerable. You know, they've been meeting there week after week. It's a miracle. Week after week, without any break for 160, 170, 180. In the case of First Mennonite, which isn't quite in the downtown, but that's now 201 years.
Right.
And I'm not sure how long some of those are going to be able to continue. There's already one that's up for sale, Zion United Church, which has been part of the downtown, part of Berlin, Kitchener since 1833. And I've heard there's others that are also vulnerable. I think with the LRT coming and intensification, the change in the property values, it's going to change that mix down there. Are they going to survive? And in some ways, I'm not sure.
Right.
I wish and hope that something comes along that can discover and actually implement some kind of collective use that's in keeping with what they were originally intended to be, and maybe even in keeping with keeping the congregations going, small as though they may be. But that's a long shot. It's going to be almost miraculous if that comes along.
The pressure on these churches is only going to increase as you see it in
But
the future.
they're huge complexes, because it's not just the places where people gather to sing. It's also Sunday school rooms, gymnasiums, meeting rooms. When you take them all together, because there's so many of them, that's a tremendous resource. And it would be really great if we could think of a way of actually using the resources of them all together, and at the same time maybe help them keep going as well, help keep the roofs repaired, help keep the water out of the basements, help keep the plumbing, that kind of thing.
How important is it to you that the public has maybe a better appreciation of some of the heritage that we have in our churches in the community?
Yeah, I don't want to really preach it because it's very much it's a personal thing. I think I'm fonder of these things than most people, and I'm not going to trying to convince people they should have the same attitude I do.
Fair enough.
And yet, I think it's something that's there that we could discuss, and it could be something that people appreciate and want to support for different reasons, right? So I'm hoping that that kind of thing could happen. But at the very least, inspire people to think, well, to appreciate their presence, and beyond that, maybe this could be the last time. You know, like it's not going to be here forever. It's the last leg of something that's been so much part of this community and our way of life for so long. I don't go to church regularly, and I expect the tour is more for people who don't go to church. So obviously, I wouldn't have it while the church
they would be in
is
there
going on. But people who kind of curious and who are looking at it from the outside.
Tell me about the details. When is it leaving? Where will it go in a rough idea? How long will it last? That kind of thing.
It's a Sunday morning, and we're going to start at 9:30.
Okay.
There are actually church services that start as early as 8, so there'll already be bells ringing and people gathering before we start.
Okay.
The meeting point is going to be what I've heard people call the Belvedere, but it's not like that. It's actually the top floor of the parking garage on Duke Street.
Oh, the Belvedere, very nice.
If you go all the way to the top, you actually see a wonderful panorama of the downtown, and most of the churches that we will be visiting, we can see beforehand. So we can sort of think, orient ourselves. And I'll give my little talk about, the Tour d'Eglise 20 years ago and what it means to churches as cultural spaces and all of that. And then most of the services start at 10 or 11, so we'll hopefully the bells will ring, and then we'll go out and do the one side of in the Civic Center neighborhood. When I did it, I was part of the Civic Center neighborhood, which is now the Old Berlin neighborhood. We'll do that first leg, pass by the garage once more time, and then do the other part, which is the St. Matthew's and historic St. Paul's and Benton Street Baptist on the other side of King Street. So there's 2 clusters.
It sounds like it's going to be quite a walk. So we will direct people to the website, let them know how to sign up, and thanks for telling us about this.
My pleasure.
Okay, Martin, we'll have to leave it at that, but we'll be right back after the break. You're watching Talk Local. Welcome back to Talk Local. I'm your host, Greg Mercer, and for our final segment tonight, we're going to hear about one more special walk, part of the Jane's Walk celebration next weekend. Pleased to be joined by Dan Graham. Dan is the former executive director of the Kitchener Blues Fest during the first 6 years, and you're now running for a seat on Kitchener Council, but that's not why you're here.
No.
You are here to tell us about a Jane's Walk that will feature, as I understand it, music venues in downtown Kitchener of the past and the present. So tell us about that. What can we expect?
Well, when I first talked to Jane, first of all, I was thrilled and honored to be asked, and I was quite excited, and I thought, geez, I'd really like to go on that tour. And then when the penny dropped and I figured out they were asking me to actually be involved in leading it, I thought, what a great opportunity, because having lived in Kitchener most of my life and being involved in the music community, I know a lot of stories, and I thought, geez, this will be great to share some of that useless information that I have stored with other folks. And so as word got out, I would get tweets and Facebook posts and email from folks saying, with little tidbits of stories that they have about music in downtown Kitchener.
Okay.
And what really kind of humbled me and shocked me is most of those stories I didn't know myself. So I've invited those folks, and I was glad to hear Juanita say that people on the walk are welcome to contribute, because that's certainly what I'm interested in doing. All of these people that have told me their little stories, by Twitter or Facebook or by email, I've invited them to come down because I enjoyed the story and I think other people would enjoy it. And Kitchener has such a rich music history. So much has happened, and especially in the downtown area. Most recently, of course, the city of Kitchener has been fantastic at getting events downtown, music events. There's been a lot of stuff happening lately, but sometimes we forget about the things that happened years ago. And in fact, one of the stops on the tour will be a church.
A music venue.
A music venue.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of great music happened in that church, and we'll talk about the two particular folks that started out in that church and did very well in the music business.
And those folks are?
Doug Haas, who is the organist at St. Andrews and has a stellar career in music. And I first saw this other gentleman, Wayne Gibbons, when I was just a kid going to Sunday school at St. Andrews when I first came to Canada. He was a blind guitar player, and he had the voice of an angel. And he actually recorded a couple of albums.
Okay.
And I actually have some of his music, so I'm going to bring that along, and we'll play a little bit of music, and it'll be fun.
So tell me about the logistics. When does this leave, and what kind of highlights will people see?
Well, we're going to kick this off on Friday night.
Okay.
7:30, we're going to meet at the same parking garage that Martin's Walk.
Okay, and that is?
The Duke Street parking garage.
Yes.
But of course, I wasn't smart enough to think of meeting on the 6th floor where we could.
You'll be at street level.
Yeah. I said we're going to meet on the street level, so we're going to meet on the street.
Okay.
And we'll go past some of the famous, infamous locations for music. The old Kitchener Legion in Ontario Street, which really started. We talk about what a great blues festival we have now. That all got started by a fellow named Glenn Smith, who started booking blues concerts on the 2nd floor of the Kitchener Legion. I remember all these blues bands lugging equipment up the stairs in those days, so we'll pass that. That was kind of the beginning of the whole thing. And then Glenn opened clubs, one called the Hoodoo Lounge, right next to where City Hall is. And then, of course, the famous Pop the Gator on Queen Street, which we'll pass. We'll drop into into Encore Records on Queen Street and have a little visit. And we'll go through Victoria Park. There's been a lot of music happen there. Of course, the Boathouse, a famous location, about to reopen. We're all really excited about that. And we'll end up back on King Street, where so much other music history has happened. And of course, if you get the timing from 7:30, you figure we'll be finishing about 9. There may just be some live music for us to hear, and who knows, we could be expecting some folks to drop in on the walk.
The tour could continue then?
Yes, it could. It could. We are expecting some special guests to drop in during the walk, and then we very well may enjoy a cool, refreshing beverage while listening to some of Kitchener's fine music.
Doesn't sound so
after
bad.
The walk.
What do you want people to take away from this? What do you hope they get out of this walk?
2 things. First of all, I want people to contribute.
Okay.
As we talked about, lots of people have great stories, and I think this is the beauty of these Jane's Walks. It's not just about learning stuff. It's about communicating and sharing stories and meeting new people. So I'm really looking forward to that. I'm actually looking forward to learning a lot more about something that I'm passionate and I love. Downtown Kitchener has always been a love of mine, obviously music. So I'd like to learn more. And some of those little stories that I know, if some people find those as interesting as I do and are entertained by it, that's great. It's not going to really be like a TMZ tour where, we're going to be waving at, Rihanna and Chris Brown and stuff like that.
Rihanna won't be there on the tour?
Not be there, but we may have some special guests.
Okay, very cool. Well, any last thing you want people to know about this? Anything that you're particularly excited about?
Well, I'm really excited about the opportunity to talk about the stuff that's gone on in Kitchener.
Okay.
Again, I live in Kitchener by choice. I've lived other places, and by far, when I've lived other places, I couldn't wait to get back to Kitchener. And I especially love the downtown. The downtown is great for so many reasons, but the music history and the music scene in Kitchener, when you look at the talent that's come out of this small city, we've had some amazing talent come out of this city. And of course, most of them got their start in some way in the downtown area.
Well, we're going to have to leave it at that. We're out of time, Dan, but thank you so much. This sounds like a fantastic walk. And that leaves Friday night at 7:30.
In front of the Duke Street parking garage.
Okay. Well, remember, we always want to hear what you think about what you're hearing on the show. You can tweet us at TalkLocalWR, tweet me directly at Mercer Record, or you can email us at talklocal@rogers.com. On behalf of the crew and my producers, thanks for watching and good night. .477 or Waterloo Regional Police at 519-650-8500 extension 8655. And we also want to hear from you about what you're hearing on the show. You can tweet us at talklocal@Waterloo@WR. We'll be right back.